Ashrenu ma tov chalkenu ma na'im Yerushatenu. How rich we are, how blessed we are to be together this morning and every Shabbat here. Welcome everyone. Shabbat Shalom. I don't know, Dr. Berk, if I mentioned this to you when we spoke, but about 40 years ago I was a young rabbi in Ohio, and my late mother-in-law was from the Schenectady area. She lived in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And she called me after hearing you speak at a scholar in residence event at the synagogue in Pittsfield. And she said, "David, you have to bring Dr. Berk to your synagogue." It took me a while to get around to it. But now we are almost neighbors, and I welcome you. It's nice to have you here. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Stephen Berk. He's a professor of history at Union College in Schenectady, the former chair of the Department of History, director of the program in Russian and Eastern European Studies, and faculty advisor to the Jewish Student Organization. He's the author of Year of Crisis, Year of Hope, Russian Jewry and the Pogroms of 1881 and 1882. And he's currently writing a book titled Our People Are Your People, American Jewry in the Struggle for Civil Rights, 1954 through 1965. The book provides an interesting discussion of an extremely important chapter in the history of the civil rights movement and attempts to dispel the myths and misunderstandings surrounding the Black-Jewish relationship. Professor Berk has been a consultant to the Wiesenthal Holocaust Center in LA. His well-received book on the pogroms of 1881-1882 deals with anti-Semitism in Russia and Eastern Europe. It's an important contribution to the prehistory of the Holocaust in the Jewish heartland. Professor Berk has written articles on Russian and Jewish history, anti-Semitism in the Middle East. In 1994, he authored a brief and interesting article on the Holocaust in Yugoslavia. He's lectured in countless cities and towns throughout this country and Canada, as well as such distinguished universities as Princeton, Vanderbilt, the University of Texas in Austin, and Williams College. He's frequently consulted by newspaper reporters, television and radio stations, including the BBC, and he's lauded as a superb lecturer and teacher. In 1996, he received the prestigious Holocaust Memorial Award from the Holocaust Survivors and Friends Education Center. The citation accompanying the award stated, "On the 50th anniversary of the end of the Nuremberg trials, the Holocaust Memorial Award honors Dr. Berk's years of dedication to understanding and education as a worldwide lecturer and spellbinding speaker on the lessons of the Shoah and its meanings for today." In addition, in 2010, Professor Berk was designated an Israel hero for his defense and advocacy of the State of Israel by the Jewish Educational Resources of New York. You're going to hear him speak now, and then after Kiddush, we'll return here in the sanctuary for a conversation on a very difficult and different topic that also we are very concerned about. Professor Berk.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom, and a happy and healthy New Year to all of you. Rabbi Steinhardt, my mother could not have done better. I thank you. That was a very fine introduction. If some of my students were here, maybe they are, I'm sure one of them would turn to the other and say, that Prof. Berk, he's a legend in his own mind. That's what they would say. I'm here to talk to you about the search for freedom, the struggle for freedom by a people with whom we have been inextricably bound to. Most of the time, not for good. But now is a different time. I'm talking about the struggle by Ukrainians to create an independent, free, and prosperous Ukraine. On the very first day of every class that I teach in history at Union College, and I've been doing it for 56 years, I tell the students, you can talk until you're blue in the face about the inexorable forces of history. Talk about ideas, talk about climate, talk about class, talk about economics, talk about whatever you want, but never, never, never minimize the role of personality in history. Towering figures have shaped the course of history. Unlike my students, we have all gone through the 20th century. Can anyone deny that the century was not influenced by Churchill and Roosevelt, Hitler, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao? You can talk again about the underlying causes of events, but never, never fail to factor these people in. And so when we talk about the Ukraine, we talk about the most important personality of them all, and that is President Vladimir Putin. The most important thing to know about Putin is that he was a member of the KGB. He always wanted to be a member of the KGB. Even in high school, he went to the local KGB headquarters and say, I'm offering my services. They told him to go to the University of Leningrad, told him to study law, and then come to see us, which he did. And he served as one of the KGB people in the eastern part of Germany in the city of Dresden. Now let's get to the point. The Germans have a good word for it, a Weltanschauung, a worldview. The worldview of a member of the KGB can be summarized in a number of ways. Point number one, if you're a member of the KGB, and like many Russians, not only members of the KGB, the greatest enemy that Russia ever faced, the greatest enemy that the Soviet Union ever faced, the greatest enemy that Russia today faces is the United States of America. The United States, in the eyes of the KGB and in the eyes of many Russians, is responsible for everything that has befallen the Soviet Union and Russia. And in fact, if you push them hard enough, and you don't have to push them very hard at all, many people, and certainly people in the now Federal Security Services, that's the new name for the KGB, will tell you that what is happening in the Ukraine, it's all prompted by the United States of America. And a second point, every country has a weakness. That's what the KGB teaches its people. Every individual has a weakness. The function of a KGB operative and the function of the KGB is to find out the weakness of the country, weakness of the individual, and then drive a locomotive right through it. I don't want to spin this out too far, but in 2016, no one who's got a brain in his or her head can deny that the Russians intruded in our election. In a political science class, you could debate how important that it was. But the federal, or that's the security services in the Russian state, they found our weakness. The weakness is the unfettered social media. You can say anything on the computer, say anything on the iPhone, anything on the Android, and there are very few checks to it. A third lesson that Putin has bought into is that you never make concessions. Never, never make concessions. For Vladimir Putin, the example is Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev made concession to concession, and what happened? He was thrown out of power, and the Soviet Union disintegrated. You never, never make concessions. And the man, not only on the domestic level, but in terms of international relations as well. And this you can take to the bank. The man who has learned this probably even better than Vladimir Putin is President Xi of China. You never, never make concessions. And finally, of course, there is one of the primary motivations for the invasion of Ukraine, a belief on the part of Putin that in the 20th century, which saw two world wars, and the Holocaust, the greatest catastrophe of them all was the end of the Soviet Union. It embarrassed the Russian people, it reduced them, diminished their role in history, and the only way to make Russia great again is to make Russia regain the territories that were lost. Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, they all have to come back. The man who told him that, his tutor, is a man by the name of Alexander Dugin, who says that Russia is a Eurasian power and that the Russian people will never again be great. Never again will they play a role in history until all of the territory of the former Soviet Union is regained. That primarily is why he invaded Ukraine. But there are other reasons as well. He thought he could do it. His intelligence people told him you can take Kiev in 3 to 4 days. They were wrong. In addition to that, there was the issue of NATO. You can't bring Russia into NATO from a Russian standpoint. For those of you who have even the most cursory knowledge of Russian history, you know Russia never tolerates, going back 1,000 years, Russia never tolerates a potentially hostile neighbor that has a contiguous border with Russia or the Soviet Union or Russia again. NATO was a problem for him. But probably the most important thing of them all, every historical analogy and political analogy is flawed. This is flawed too. I make that concession to you. But nonetheless, it is relevant. A prosperous and independent Ukraine will undermine his role, undermine his authoritarian control of Russia. A prosperous and independent, free Ukraine will be to Putin's Russia what West Berlin was to East Berlin, and what was used to call West Germany was to East Germany, communist Germany. It would undermine the position of Putin. That's the reason. These are the reasons as to why he intervened. 2 years, almost 2 years into the conflict, what do we know? We know that American intelligence is the best in the world. Only the CIA and the National Security Agency predicted what would happen. Even President Zelensky, he understood. Zelensky believed that it would be a rapid thrust from the Donbass. Putin would take some more areas, and that would be the end of it. Only American intelligence made the case, which was correct. He's going to go for broke. He's going to try and take it all. In addition to that, we have seen the great quality of American weapons. Again, I know I'm speaking in a synagogue. I know, I know you're not supposed to talk about war and weaponry, but American weapons are good. For all of the talk, it's good. Our tanks, our surface-to-air missiles, our anti-tank missiles, our defense against drones, they're very, very good. We also learned something else. This is not a political lecture that I'm giving you, but President Biden, whatever you may think about him, whatever you have deficiencies you may see in him, did well when it came to Ukraine. He marshaled the American people behind the cause and marshaled the international community behind the cause. That was good. And in addition to that, you get a good example again of charisma from a certain source. Again, I'll give you the analogy. President Zelensky is to Ukraine what Winston Churchill was to Great Britain in those 18 months after France's fall into 1940 and 1941. Charisma and personality counts. No mystery here, I must say. One has to understand, the man is an actor. He was a comedian. He's good with a soundbite, almost Churchillian in some ways. After all, when President Biden offered him an escape for his family, for himself and his family, what did Zelensky say? I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. That's good stuff. It really is. And on the other side, the Russians have demonstrated great incompetence. This goes back almost 1,000 years. Their logistics were poor, their weapons were poor, they never gave initiative to junior officers. That's why so many Russian generals have been killed. They don't trust their junior officers. They have to be at the front, and the Ukrainians have managed to kill them. But, as Elie Wiesel always said, there's always a but. And the but is this. Henry Kissinger was a very smart man, a brilliant man. And when he dealt with the Russians, he said something like this. What the Russians lack in intelligence, they make up in persistence. They just keep coming. They come and they come and they come, willing to take enormous losses. In addition to that, as we all know, whatever you're doing, there's a learning curve in everything. I'm a better professor. I was a better professor 10 years out than I was 5 years out. Better 20 years out than I was 10 years out. Even the Russians have learned. Their defenses now are very good. Their drones are very, very good. They are digging in better than anybody else. Russian artillery going back 300 years has always been very good. They're mastering the drones. The result is going to be that this is, in all likelihood, going to be a war of attrition. It's going to go on unless something unforeseen takes place. And then, since I began the whole talk talking to you about Mr. Putin, then the question is, how long will he be there? Suppose he disappears from the scene. What are the chances of his disappearing from the scene? Don't bet on it. But you never know what's going to happen. There is a possibility that a group of generals will say to him, Volya, you made us into a pariah state. You're really dissipating our strength. You gotta go, Volya. Remember, in an authoritarian country, and unfortunately even in a democratic country, every leader is a bullet away from oblivion. A general may say, as was said to Lavrenti Beria in 1953 by Khrushchev and Marshal Zhukov, you gotta go, Beria. You're a thief and a pedophile. You gotta go. And they shot him. Somebody, again, among the generals may say to Putin, you've got to go. And those oligarchs, of whom there were some Jews involved here as well, the multi-billionaires, the men that Putin made rich, they may say to you, you made us rich, Volya. You really did. But look what's happening. Our assets in foreign countries are frozen. We can't travel anywhere. It's time that you go. And then there's always, unlikely, I must say, unlikely. And then there's a possibility of a popular revolt. That possibility exists. There's a man in waiting, Alexander Navalny. He's rotting away in a Siberian prison, but there are many people who have rallied to him. The problem in Russia has always been, for a very long time, it's a toss-up, as one commentator put it, between the TV and the refrigerator. A husband and wife are sitting watching television. And what do they see? They see Putin. They see the generals. They see his flunkies, the so-called Siloviki, the men of power and strength. And they talk about how the Russian army is going from victory to victory in Ukraine. Victory is right around the corner. And then the husband says to his wife, I want to get something to eat. Opens up the refrigerator, and there's very little there. On my last trip to Russia in Moscow, I spoke to a man. He was a supporter of Putin, but he told me when he wants cheese, when he wants anything good, mechanically or electronically, he goes to Helsinki in Finland. So it's a toss-up between the TV and the refrigerator. The possibility exists, but one of the things we have learned in the 20th and 21st century, that those who control the media, those who control, or to put it as Mao Zedong used to say, political power flows from the barrel of a gun. The opposition doesn't have the guns. Putin has the guns. It is possible, but it is unlikely. So I will ask the old Russian question. For those who have studied Russian history, it was the Russian revolutionaries used to ask in the 19th and 20th century. In Russian it is, что делать? What is to be done? And the answer is, we cannot control what's happening in the Russian state, but we can support Ukraine. We have to support Ukraine. Not only because it is the right thing to do, not only because it's just, but because a lot hangs in the balance. You know who's looking very closely at what is happening in Ukraine? They probably don't give a damn about the Ukrainians, but there's something else for them at stake. President Xi of China is looking at what happens. If there's a flagging of American resolve, this again you can take to the bank. There will be an attack upon Taiwan, and that may plunge the world into a world war. And the other man who is looking, Kim Il-sung of North Korea, a fruitcake if there ever was one. Kim Il-sung, if he sees a flagging or reduction of American resolve, don't bet on the fact that he will not cross the 38th parallel and launch an invasion of South Korea. And then the government of Iran, the Islamic Republic, at war with Israel. If they see, again, a diminution of American resolve, all hell can break loose in the Middle East. As it already has, it can get much, much worse. So these are the things that have to be done. We are a free-loving people. We must support another people that is trying to achieve freedom. Before I go, let me take you two things. One, we'll talk about the elephant in the room, but I'll begin again with Putin. And that is the very interesting relationship between Putin, Israel, and the Jews. Putin has never done what every Russian leader and Soviet leader did. When in trouble, blame the Jews. For those of you whose antecedents come from the Russian state, maybe your parents used that expression because they heard it on the street, na ulica, on the street. Beži dov spasaj Rosiju, beat the kikes and save Russia. When in trouble, always use anti-Semitism. Putin has not done that. He has also had a working relationship, not only with Netanyahu, but with anybody who governs Israel. For Israel, people have criticized Israel because not coming down hard enough condemning Putin for the Ukraine. The fact of the matter is, Israel and Russia really are in a very tense position in Syria. The Israelis have bombed Syria over 1,000 times. Syria is the conduit through which weapons from Iran go to Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Hezbollah. The Israelis bomb all the time. The Russians are in Syria. There has to be a working out, a relationship here. There has to be a relationship here. And indeed, that relationship has continued. How long, I do not know. Because one of the things that has taken place is because of the sanctions, the Russians now are getting important weaponry from Iran. And here's the quid pro quo. The Iranians are in effect telling the Russians, we'll give you the drones. We'll teach you how to use them. We'll give you the intercontinental ballistic missiles that you want. We'll give you all the spare parts that we can scrounge up. But in turn, you've got to abandon that relationship with Israel. And so Putin's rhetoric has become very, very harsh. And then I'll lighten this up. But it's a true story, a really an accurate story. The question is, why was Putin always somewhat sympathetic to the Jews? That's a stretch. It's a little embarrassing that Putin has a close friend, the chief Chabad rabbi in Moscow. That's a problem. But they get along. Putin even went to a synagogue. Where does this apparent sympathy for the Jews come from? Some people have suggested that he lived in a communal apartment where several families lived, and one of the families was an elderly Jewish couple that babysat for him. They treated him nicely, maybe. More to the point is, he in fact had a German teacher, a teacher who taught him German in high school, and that teacher was Jewish. He had a fondness for her. She made Aliyah. And when Putin visited Israel, he's the first Russian or Soviet leader ever to visit Israel, he bought her an apartment. The woman died without leaving the apartment anymore. She left the apartment back to Putin. And there was an ad in an Israeli newspaper about the apartment. It's a very nice apartment. And the rent was listed. And somebody wrote a caption in the newspaper, with this landlord, you better make sure you pay the rent on time. Now, we don't know how long this will go on, but Putin is beginning to turn against Israel. That's the quid pro quo. And then, my friends, let's talk about the elephant in the room. I know to whom I'm speaking. To my students, it means nothing. But again, if you even have the most limited knowledge of Jewish history, you know what I'm about to tell you is true. The Ukraine runs with Jewish blood. Beginning in 1648, 1649 with the Khmelnytsky massacres, the pogroms of the 18th and the 19th century. And in fact, I must tell you, had the Holocaust not taken place, the greatest slaughter of the Jewish people would have been the Ukrainian pogroms of 1918 to 1920 in the aftermath of the Russian Civil War. And in World War II, tens of thousands of Ukrainians collaborated with the Nazis in the murder of what approximately is close to 1,500,000 Jews. One cannot get away from this. It raises a very interesting religious or theological and philosophical issue. Can you blame the sons, the grandsons, and the great-grandsons for the sins of their ancestors? Our tradition is clear. Our ethics are clear. You cannot. You cannot hold these people who do not have blood on their hands responsible for what has taken place. And so I come back to you again for the third time. We Americans and we Canadians, we are a free people. We cherish freedom. We fought side by side in 2 world wars. And the United States almost single-handedly defended the world against Soviet communism. The answer, my friends, again, we may have to hold our noses, I say that to you, because of that historical past. We can never forgive and not forget. But for the sake of freedom, for the sake of being true to our ideals and our aspirations, once again, support the Ukraine. Shabbat Shalom, and thank you very much.
Yasher Koach, and thank you very, very much for that insight and understanding. Demographics are unusual, and I understand the demographics.
Thank you. It's a privilege. I know.
Shabbat Shalom again, and Saharayim Tovim. Professor Berk, it's a measure of your success, how well you were liked this morning by the number of people that come to stay after Kiddush. So we do this frequently with our scholars. In residence, there's rarely this many people that come to continue the conversation. Again, I want to thank you. It was a great, really wonderful presentation, a very important presentation. I think for some people, not speaking about Israel these days, some people it was surprising. For some people, as difficult and as challenging as the topic was, it was a relief that because there's other things going on in this world, and we can't move our eye away from the world we live in. Anyway, I understand that we'll start this way. Professor Berk is going to give some introductory remarks about anti-Semitism on the college campus. I'll take the privilege of the first question, and then you can ask questions. We have a rule. The rule is you get to ask one question. Everybody know, hold your hand up if you heard that. You get to ask one question, and you don't give speeches. That's why we have a scholar in residence. Okay. Please.
Shabbat Shalom again. Can you hear me? Thank you very, very much for coming. As I told Rabbi Steinhardt, this really is a magnificent place. It's a privilege for me to be here. Let me begin. I'll talk to you for about 5 minutes, maybe a little bit more, and then just ask any questions that you have. I begin by saying to you that colleges and universities are very different in demography from the time that you and I were in college. The number of foreign students who are in American universities and colleges is great, much greater than it ever was, and certainly much greater than it was when I was in college, and I think when you were in college. The argument for bringing in the foreign students, first of all, is money. That is, many colleges, they could go to China and fill up their classes. The large, very, very upper middle class in China, which numbers about, some people say 300 million people, want to send their children to the United States for a whole variety of reasons. But it's not only the people from China, it's people from all over. I'm going to make a statement to you which you might find repugnant or you might disagree with. But most of these foreign students, on an a priori basis, come with very, very hostile feelings towards the United States. We're an imperialist country. We throw our weight around too much. We have too much money. They come here because the education is superb and the economic opportunities are superb. But many of them do not like the United States or any country closely associated with the United States. The second group of people, there are large numbers of students from the Middle East. This you really can take to the bank. Students who come from the Middle East bring with them the baggage of the Middle East, which is anti-Semitism and tremendous hostility towards the state of Israel. So what you are seeing being played out now on college campuses, that is really, to a certain extent, really a consequence of what I just spoke to you about. The question is, are these students coming on their own, or are some of them subsidized by Qatar and other Arab countries? Is there, again, I cannot prove this. I am simply throwing it out to you and suggesting to you that it may be a very, very well-conceived plan on the part of a number of Arab organizations and Arab countries to, I would hesitate to use the term, flood our universities and colleges with students from the Middle East, but certainly to put large numbers of them there. And so that's, to a certain extent, that's what you're seeing. In addition to that, there's something that I mentioned to you in the lecture from the Bima, and that is the unfettered social media. You can say anything, absolutely anything that you want, and a lot of it is anti-Israeli stuff and anti-Semitic stuff. And every poll indicates that many people, particularly young people, don't get their news from the print, don't get their news from television. They get them from TikTok. They get it from all sorts of, let's say, stuff on the computer. And a lot of that is very, very hostile. In addition to that, there is, this is hard to explain, but it is a fact of life. Faculties are overwhelmingly to the left. And part and parcel of that is a great deal of anti-Israeli sentiment. Some of it is sheer anti-Semitism, and that is true on the campuses as well. Why do I say that? Look, whatever is happening between Israel and the Palestinians, it pales into insignificance compared to what the Chinese are doing to the Uyghurs. I mean, they're talking about sterilization of women, of Muslim women in China. And what Putin and before him Yeltsin did to the Chechens in Chechnya, but you don't see demonstrations outside of the Russian embassy or the Chinese embassy or any of these places where people are under the gun. You don't see protests there, but you also see a good deal of hostility towards Israel. So I don't think you have to have a great insight or be a great logician to come to the conclusion that for a lot of these people, it is anti-Semitism. In addition to that, and I say this, it'll come out the wrong way, I'm not being condescending. Some of these students who are protesting against Israel are bright as a whip. They are good in artificial intelligence, in computers, but their knowledge of history is not very great. I mean, someone pointed out, you look at some of these kids, he asks one of them, you're talking about a Palestine between the river and the sea. What's the river? The Mississippi. I mean, the ignorance there is absolutely tremendous. Nobody has, very few people have a sense of history. They really don't know, really, whether it's our narrative or really as close as you can to an objective narrative. In the end, I must tell you, if I was lecturing to you on the Middle East and the Israeli conflict, it is a complicated issue, everybody knows that. But the bottom line in the Middle East, the bottom line, is the unwillingness of the Islamic world to accept a Jewish presence in even a truncated part of Palestine. Arthur Rupin, a German Zionist, said it in German, in 1931. Moshe Dayan said it in 1968 in Hebrew. I will say it to you in English. What we can get from the Arabs we do not need. What we need from the Arabs we cannot get. That's the basic problem. Don't let anybody else tell you it's Jerusalem, it's the refuge. That is the basic problem. If the Islamic world were prepared to accept a Jewish state and even a small part of Palestine, all of these issues could be worked out. But the kids don't know that, and that is a problem. Is it the dawning of a new era? Well, to a certain extent, it is. The Rabbi Steiner, put it very well. You and I are the beneficiaries of the golden age of American Jewry. This is not a lecture on the history of anti-Semitism. Suffice it to say that the barriers came down after the Second World War. And even Hollywood, which for all of the talk about the Jewish domination of Hollywood, in the interwar period, never made a film about anti-Semitism. It's only after the war, after Time magazine and Fortune and Life magazine published the issues to cover the Nuremberg trials and give the pictures of the liberated concentration camps, Hollywood finally decides that it's all right to take the issue of anti-Semitism. You all saw, I assume most of you saw the film Gentleman's Agreement. Right, that's a very interesting film. You see the limits of Hollywood, however, in another film, which is also very good. That's the film you all would have seen had Gentleman's Agreement not come out. That film is called Crossfire. Crossfire is set in San Francisco. You see the limits of Hollywood here. Crossfire is set in San Francisco, really in the summer of 1945, right after the war is over. And a group of demobilized Marines come into a bar, and they see a guy at the bar in civilian clothing. Somehow they find out that he's Jewish. And they talk to him, oh, while we were getting our gullions shot off in the Pacific, you were making time with our women and with our girls. Well, it turns out the guy had been wounded on Iwo Jima, but they didn't know that, and he didn't say anything. They kill him. These demobilized Marines, they kill this guy, and Robert Young, the detective, comes in and he covers the case. You see, and he gets the people who killed the Jewish fellow. You see the limits of Hollywood in the fact that the original screenplay has the man being killed not because he's a Jew, but because he's a homosexual. Hollywood wouldn't touch that for another 50 years. But the fact of the matter is, Hollywood has discovered anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism becomes un-American. You're an anti-Semite, you're spitting on the graves of our soldiers who liberated the camps. So you and I, the barriers come down, the residential covenants come down, the country clubs open up, the universities and the colleges open up. My own institution, Union College, had a Jewish quota from 1920 to 1965. No more than 8 to 10% of any incoming class could be composed of Jews. This started at Harvard even before the Second World War. As Harvard goes, so goes American education. All the Ivies had it. The safety valve for the Jews, for large numbers of Jews, was the City University of New York. You know what they used to call CCNY? Circumcised Citizens of New York. There were so many Jews at CCNY and at the other city schools. And some of the southern schools and Midwestern schools picked up the slack. The Ivies had the quotas, but the other schools, many of the other schools, were open. So it is that we're not used to this. And the apocalypse is not going to descend here. It isn't going. I don't wake up in the morning and see a fascist under the bed. I don't believe, again, that we're going to see the Nazification of American society. And I must tell you, how can I say this to you without getting into trouble here? I'm a registered Democrat. I come, if you haven't caught my accent, I come from the golden land of Brooklyn, where, if there are any doctors in the audience, I will tell them something that they never learned in medical school, but I am right. You ready for me now? If you're born in Brooklyn, on chromosome 16, there's a gene that codes for the Democratic Party. It is impossible, impossible. The hand withers. But to lighten this up, I guess I gave you a very somber talk. Here's an example. I get a call in 1980. Now remember, I'm a registered Democrat. I come from Brooklyn. My friend Marvin, the yeshiva bacher from Brooklyn, calls me, Steve, who did you vote for? Did you vote? I said, not yet, Marvin, not yet. Who did you vote for? Silence, silence. I said, Marvin, did you really vote for Reagan? Yes. I said, he's a yeshiva bacher from Brooklyn. Now, if you fill me with New York City, what I'm going to tell you makes a good deal of sense. I said, Marvin, how did it feel to vote Republican? You know what he said, the yeshiva bacher? It's like the first time I went to Nathan's and I ate a treif hot dog. I thought a bolt of lightning would strike me in the booth. But I mention all of this to you. President Biden, who I like and will probably vote for, did no justice to the right cause by comparing Donald Trump with Adolf Hitler. That's an exaggeration. You don't want to get in. You may have all your problems with Trump, and I'm not a Trumper. I didn't vote for him. I'm not going to vote for him. But this is not Adolf Hitler that we're talking about. You cheapen the Holocaust, you cheapen the suffering when you use examples like that. You shouldn't use examples like that. You may say he's cruel, that he maybe a threat to democracy, that's a matter of debate, but you don't call him, you don't say, this is like Nazi Germany or Weimar Germany in the 20s and Nazi Germany in the 30s. You don't say that type of thing. Now, what I am happy about, again, I didn't mention, I wasn't political in the talk. I admire President Biden for what he has done in dealing with Ukraine. I admire him for what he has done in dealing with Israel. He has really come out very strongly. Some of it is diminishing, but he has come out very, very strongly. But if you want to talk politics, and you can raise all of this, I'm worried about the left wing of the Democratic Party. It is a matter of great concern to me. It really is. These people in the so-called squad have brought anti-Semitism. People like Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, for example. And the smartest of them all, and the most dangerous of them all, is the one that is euphemistically referred to as AOC. So this worries me in the Democratic Party. In the Republican Party, I'm just mentioning this to you, some of the things that we can talk about. But what is most significant and what should be most heartening to all of us, we have learned some lessons from the history of anti-Semitism in the United States. The most dangerous time for our people in the United States was in the interwar period, the 20s and the 30s. And the reason for that is, it's the only time, with one other exception, when men and women of influence and affluence endorsed anti-Semitism. If you bought a Ford in the 1920s and drove the Ford off of the lot and opened the dashboard of your new Ford, you would have a copy of Henry Ford's Dearborn Independent. In that newspaper, that weekly newspaper, was summarized, serialized, an article called The International Jew. It was an American version of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. That was bad for us. This was a great American hero, the assembly line, the Model T, the Model A, and so on, and a man of great wealth and influence. The second, of course, was Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh, again, for reasons that are more within the realm of the psychoanalyst than they are of the historian or the political scientist, Lindbergh hated our guts. But he was a nuanced man. He never spoke about the Jews. He spoke about, there are a group of co-religionists in our country that are more interested in the fate of their co-religionists in Europe than they are in the fate of the United States. He became a champion of the anti-isolationist movement. That was a man of great prestige. He was a champion, the poster boy of the American First movement. And the third, anybody from Detroit here? All right, then you know what I'm talking about. That's Father Coughlin. Father, the first radio priest. 7 o'clock every Sunday night, millions of people would turn into Father Coughlin, who told them about the Jew deal, the Jews responsible for communism, the Jews responsible for fascism, the Jews responsible for all sorts of things. That was bad stuff. One of the lessons we have learned is that when men and women of influence and affluence endorsed anti-Semitism, we are in trouble. That is not the case now. President Biden has been very, very good in dealing with this. President Obama, not as good as I would have hoped, but you can't get far in American society, in American politics, pushing anti-Semitism. You can't do it. And the best examples that I can give you are about two people on the right who most of you never supported, and I didn't support, even though I was a child when one of them really made an appearance. The first Senator McCarthy, the red baiter, the man of the blacklists, and so on. McCarthy not only never uttered an anti-Semitic word, but more embarrassing, his chief attorney was Roy Cohn, and his chief investigator was G. David Schein, two Jews. McCarthy was really a very unfortunate man, let me put it that way. If he thought he could get traction out of anti-Semitism, he would have used it. And of course, the other one, the unrepentant George Wallace. Wallace never uttered an anti-Semitic word. He understood that you can't get far in America and American politics pushing anti-Semitism. So that's what heartens me, that people of influence and affluence are speaking out against anti-Semitism. Maybe not enough, maybe it's not as much as we want. And again, the elephant in the room is that some of the anti-Semitism really comes from the African American community. And one would have liked some people who are men and women of influence and affluence, who are African Americans, to speak out more boldly against it. President Obama did that once. He did that, actually. Talking about entertainers, black entertainers who were endorsing anti-Semitism. He should have done it more, and other black leaders should have done more of that. So, this is a difficult time. The golden age is over, but I believe that American institutions are strong enough. Most Americans are decent people. They will not accept this. People are speaking out against anti-Semitism, but on college campuses, not enough. Why aren't they speaking out? Well, there are a number of reasons for that. Some of them buy into the so-called progressive line, and that Israel is guilty, and that Jews who support Israel are guilty of things, and so on. But here's a rule of thumb. Presidents are scared out of their minds by the faculty. No president, especially one who is on the make, one who thinks that he or she is going to move up, is going to take on the faculty. Faculties are overwhelmingly left. They are opposed to Israel. They are sympathetic to some of the things that are being said on campus. That's one issue. And even if they are not going to take on the faculty. In my own institution at Union College, Chabad had a bingo rally in support of Israel after October 7th. A young woman whose family comes from the Sudan was not there, posted with her name that all of those students who attended that rally in behalf of Israel are guaranteed a place in hell. So Chabad asked me to give a lecture at 5 o'clock. I gave the lecture, and lo and behold, that young woman was there. We had an exchange, and I finished the exchange by saying to her, do you believe that people who attend an a pro-Israeli rally should burn in hell? And she said, I do. Alumni got very terribly upset about this, and then the president of Union College sent a letter out to all people connected to the alumni and students, in which he said he condemned anti-Semitism, and then he said, we do not condone what the student said, and we do not condone what the member of the faculty did in dealing with the students, something like that. The alumni went crazy. He put me on the same level as the bigot. That's a problem. That's part of the problem on college campuses. So I think what happened with the three presidents was a good thing. People are responding in ways that they should, and I think we are making progress. But make no mistake, if you have children or grandchildren who are attending universities and colleges, particularly in the Northeast and in California, they are in for a time the likes of which you and I never experienced. And we've got to do something with our students. Some people say, our kids don't know our story. That's not true. Many of our students do know the history of Israel, do know the context, do know, but they're not tough. They're not tough. They go to the best suburban high schools, public high schools. They go to the best private schools where civility is the order of the day. I can tell you, those Arab kids, they come at you like this, boom, 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 just like that. And our kids wither. They just wither. They're just not used to that confrontation. So what I'm saying to you is, and we'll open the floor, and any questions that you have, we can do as best as I can. I'm telling you again what I tell my students. History and politics, that's not mathematics, chemistry, and physics. You cannot say A plus B produces C. You cannot do it. It's all a matter, it's all subjective. You look at the data, you look at the memoir literature, you look at what people said, what have said, and you come up, you formulate a response. But nobody, including myself, has a monopoly on the truth.
There's a lot there, a little bit for us to unpack. The three college presidents and their appearance before the Congressional Committee shocked all of us. It seems that two of the three, at least, kind of took back their positions, tried to defend themselves, and condemned anti-Semitism, seemed to realize that they had made a mistake in that process. What was motivating them? Was it the fear of the faculty that you spoke about just then? Was it bad advice from lawyers about free speech issues? Because one thing you'll have to say about them is they were smart women. So how were they so blind and deaf at that moment?
Look, that's a very good question, and I can't give you a definitive answer. Let me say to you that as far as the three presidents are concerned, to the best of my knowledge, and I'm not being condescending here, they went to the same law firm.
It seemed that way.
No, but we live, no insult intended, we live in a very litigious society. People are very conscious of what they say, and they were told, stay away from this, take a neutral position. Just don't deal with it. Some of them really didn't understand what was taking place. They didn't understand. None of them are Middle East specialists. None of them understood what it means. We are free Palestine from the river to the sea. Did they know that that's a genocidal remark? Did they know that it means it's wiping out the state of Israel? They didn't understand that. They really did. It didn't mean anything to them. No, we talk about, I don't think those three presidents did. I don't think they really understood what that really meant. Some of them were afraid of left-wing faculty members. I think that is correct. Some of them were counseled by attorneys. Some of them actually bought into this. That is, they saw what happened on October 7th. They saw it as a good. They didn't like the rape, too much bloodshed and all of that type of thing, and the killing. But many of them thought that the Palestinian cause was a justified cause, and that anything that could be done in the name of the justice for the Palestinians. Now, I told you in my talk about the influence of personality. Ideas are important. One of the men that is most important here is a man that some of you may have read in college. He's dead at the age of 36. That's Frantz Fanon, who talked about the underprivileged, the oppressed, in which he argued, and many people bought into it, that in the struggle against oppression, anything is permissible. Anything is possible. And who is responsible, or ultimately responsible for it? It's the white population of Europe and the United States. If you believe that, and if you start to use terms that are horrendous, there are certain things that you say, there are certain words. The N-word, for example, drives people crazy. The other word on the international level, and most dangerous for Israel, is when you use the word apartheid. Apartheid is such a bad word, and when you mistakenly and unjustifiably argue that Israel is an apartheid state, do you know what that means? It means that the state of Israel doesn't have the right to exist. Now, Jimmy Carter is an old man. He's going to meet his maker very, very soon. He's a good and decent man, but I will always hold against Jimmy Carter that in one of his books, he was among the first to use the term apartheid in describing the state of Israel. That was a terrible, terrible mistake on his part. So, law firms, fear of the faculty, progressive thought, all of these things came into play. Now, as far as the president of Harvard is concerned, what is astonishing about Harvard, what is absolutely astonishing, is that they would have picked her in the first place. This is the premier institution in the United States. As Harvard goes, as I said, American education goes. The presidents of Harvard have always been very, very distinguished scholars. They vetted this woman. They knew beforehand that there were issues of plagiarism, but even beyond that, even beyond the issue of her not responding well to anti-Semitism and then trying to cover her tracks, this is not the type of person that should have governed Harvard. But, again, here we get into the delicate issues here. This is affirmative action gone wrong. She was made the president of Harvard. They wanted the first African-American president, and they wanted to make her that. And I must tell you, if you want to go on to move in this direction, I'm not a Neanderthal man. Again, I'm from Brooklyn. I'm a registered Democrat. But if you have any connections to your school, take a hard and long look at those committees of diversification, equity, and inclusion. The charters of some of these DEI programs, where they talk about white privilege and talk about raising the minorities, that seems innocuous. But in many places, in medical schools, all professional schools, that's another way of establishing a Jewish quota. Be very, very careful there. So we have some difficult times that we are confronting. But once again, this is not the end of the world for us. It's not the end of the world for our children and our grandchildren. We will get through this. And maybe because I'm a historian or not a political scientist or a sociologist or an anthropologist, the historian has a sense of perspective. We've been there before. You think times are tough now? Think about the times that your parents and your grandparents experienced. Nothing compares to coming as an immigrant to a new country, not knowing the language, not having anything. And also, the Depression. In 1940, a survey was made. There were 300 anti-Semitic organizations in the United States. Anti-Semitism in the State Department. Anti-Semitism, now this is an interesting issue if you want to pick this up, maybe FDR. You know what the old joke in the 30s and 40s was? The Jews lived in three worlds. Die Welt, this world. Some of them thought about jene Welt, the other world to come. They all loved Roosevelt. But Roosevelt was not with us on a basic issue. So there was anti-Semitism, that is the issue of immigration. So there was anti-Semitism in high places. People in Congress would use terrible terms in describing Jews and black people. The polling of the 1930s would chill the socks off of you. In one poll, 25% of the American people wanted an American version of the Nuremberg racial laws in our country. So the war, the Depression, 25% of the workforce was unemployed. People were frightened. It was much worse then. We got through that. We will get through this.
The American Jewish community and our advocacy organizations have invested big dollars on the campus, both for Israel advocacy and also to fight anti-Semitism. And apparently we haven't been successful with that. What would your recommendations be to the leadership of the American Jewish community in terms of supporting our causes and fighting against anti-Semitism on the campus? How should we be doing this? Because we obviously haven't succeeded.
We live in a marketplace of ideas. That's the cliche expression. Bad ideas have to be combated with good ideas. It has to be made clear to people that anti-Semitism is a dangerous ideology. Again, I'm telling you what you must have heard ad nauseum. That is, it never ends with the Jews. It never, never ends with the Jews. Anti-Semitic governments begin to take a totalitarian or authoritarian position, and they begin to move against other minorities and other groups, and they really destroy the societies in which they are in. Again, what's the classic cliche, the real cliche? We are the canary in the mine. When they come against us, and they hit us hard, and we suffer, you can bet your last dollar that we're not the last group to suffer in a country like that. And that has to be made clear. You know what? We're all friends here, right? So let it rip. My mother always told me, may she rest in peace, never forget your friends. You ready for me now? Gird your loins or whatever you have that passes for loins. Here we go. Don't look down with condescension on the evangelical community. Don't look down with contempt on the evangelical community. Yeah, some of them are off the wall on basic social issues. We understand that. Some of them want to convert us. I understand that. But here's a statement, you can challenge me with this because I don't have the proof. It's an impressionistic view. There may be more support in the evangelical community for the state of Israel than there is in the American Jewish community. Don't jettison those people. So, they are with us on this issue of anti-Semitism. And you know what? There's no harm. Use every leverage that you have. And that is, If Jewish money is important to an institution, make sure that you let the people who come and ask you for money, let them know how you feel about what's going on your college campus or university campus. Again, you have to fight bad ideas with good ideas. You talk to them. You write letters. You talk to anybody who comes to you from the university or college asking for money, or just simply a rally in behalf of the college. Let people know where you stand. Let them know how bad anti-Semitism is. So I'm not sure I can say beyond that. We have issues of free speech. The rabbi has mentioned it. That's a very, very difficult issue to resolve. So, for example, my granddaughter goes to Muhlenberg College, a very fine school. Muhlenberg is a very fine, small liberal arts college. There's a professor there, a Jewish professor, who is vehemently anti-Israeli, vehemently, very pro-Palestinian. And there are people, Jewish parents of students at Muhlenberg, they want to get rid of her. You can't do it. You can't do it. Don't even try to do it. Let people know at the institution how you feel about this, but free speech is there. The position to take. Now, some schools are adopting this position. We are neutral. We will not say anything on behalf of the Palestinians. We will not say anything on behalf of Israel. We are neutral. And we will tolerate any discussion as long as the discussion does not lead or use incendiary language, inflammatory language, which can possibly lead to attacks upon minority, particularly Jewish students. Because what we learned as children, and as we learned from our parents and our teachers, most of what we learned from them was really good stuff. But one thing we learned, it was meant well. It was meant well, especially if you're a boy, a teenage boy, even before puberty, always getting into fights. So what did our parents and our teachers tell us? Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never harm me. That's not true. It is simply not true. Words can harm. Words can be inflammatory. And that is the position that we should demand of every college and university president. That is free speech, say what you will, watch your language, and any attempt to intimidate, to harass students, Jewish students in particular, because they're the ones under the gun, it will not be tolerated. And the model for all of us, for all college and university presidents, should be President Ben Sass of the University of Florida. His statement was the best that I have ever heard. Condemning, again, talking about free speech, but making it clear to every faculty member and every student at the University of Florida in Gainesville that there will be no toleration of violence or harassment or intimidation. That's the position we should take.
I'm going to open this up to questions from the floor. Before I do so, I just quickly want to tell you or share a story. I have a 42-year-old son that was quite liberal until October 6th. And then on social media, he realized something really sick was taking place. He's a therapist. He took upon himself to fight the lies about Israel and the Jewish people. Somebody responded to him saying, "What do you know, being white and privileged, about oppression?" And he said, "I happen to have a history of 2,000 years of oppression. How dare you question that in our backgrounds? Because we are perceived as being part of the white privileged society, and we fit someplace other than." Okay, anybody with questions? Yes.
It's hard, you know, there should be somebody.
What's that?
Do you have somebody with a microphone?
Yeah, there is a microphone here. If somebody wants to.
Don't be afraid to come
Yeah,
up.
come up.
So everybody can hear.
Also, there are people on live stream that need to hear.
Thank you. Could you comment on the Students for Palestine? The Students for Palestine, I understand it was heavily backed by Hamas, heavily backed by money from Qatar, and they're all over the United States now. And now that we've seen what happened October 7th, I was there, by the way, in Jerusalem when the war started. It was no fun, I can tell you that. But How do you see the influence of that particular group on the American campus?
I assume that everybody heard the question, and I assume that you're talking about Students for Justice in Palestine. That is an unfortunate organization. It does have a great deal of influence. Again, how much influence I cannot say, but it has some influence on American campuses. And given the fact that some of the students are Jewish and some of the faculty members are Jewish, they, again, because I've seen in my own institution a very anti-Israeli professor who happens to be Jewish, always starts off talking, I'm Jewish. Another one says, I'm married to someone who is Jewish. That's no defense. It doesn't do anything. But, again, as law, you can't stop them. You cannot stop people from saying certain things. When they talk about free Palestine from the river to the sea, when they instigate demonstrations threatening Jewish students, then, as the president of Columbia did, at Columbia University, she threw them off campus. That was the right thing to do. Where they are funded from, you raise the interesting issue, I cannot say. That we need further congressional investigations to see whether they are really funded by Qatar or Abu Dhabi or some of these other places. I cannot, in all honesty, I cannot say that they are. There's a real possibility that they are. And the other thing is, that has to be looked into, is some American institutions receive enormous sums of money from Arab countries. Cornell gets over $1 billion from Arab countries. A good deal of it goes to, again, medical research and so on, but I don't know where the rest of it goes. So that is an issue, and that's also an issue in the sense, if you think that you can, let's say, try to influence a college or university administration by withdrawing Jewish money from it, yes, that can have an impact. It certainly can have an impact, but it is no panacea, because what may happen is that they simply will get more money from the Arab world. But again, now I'm talking about speculative stuff. I don't know. We know how much money comes to various institutions. I took Cornell gets over, some schools get $500 million. The major research universities get a lot. How does that translate into influence about the way presidents act? That's something that has to be looked into.
Yes. You have to come get the mic.
He's got it.
We can't hear you. You have to come over to the aisle. Anybody else that's closer to the aisle, come on over.
Okay, Dr. Berk, Rabbi Scheinhardt said something very interesting a few minutes ago. How do the Jewish kids and students, what's happening to them? I'm from Montreal, Quebec. We were 80,000 Jews about 10 years ago. It's dwindling now. We're down. Thank God for Chabad. Chabad in Montreal, I'm just saying, in Quebec, surrounding areas, is in every corner. We have Chabad just keeping the families together. It's
What's the question? You have to ask a question.
No, there's no question. I'm just saying we have a great university.
We're entertaining questions, not speeches.
The question
Alex,
is,
you can give your
okay,
Chabad
I'll
talk
revert
tomorrow
it to
night.
a question. We have a university called McGill University, and the students there rally for anti-Semitism often. And you ask the students what they're rallying for, and they don't know what Israel is. They don't even know there's a state of Israel. How do you overcome that?
How do you deal with the ignorance on the part of students? That's the basic question.
Yeah.
And the answer is, again, in a marketplace of ideas, you've got to educate them to the best of our ability. But keep aware, I think the rabbi mentioned it in one of the preliminary talks from the Bima. There are some people that you cannot convince. Don't think that you can talk to some of these students and say, you know, you don't know anything, but they will continue to adhere. We know this in American politics. Whether you're talking to a Republican, a diehard Republican, or a diehard Democrat, you can speak until you're blue in the face, you're not going to convince them. The ones we want to influence are the people in the middle. The people who are not knowledgeable, the people who are not committed to either side. Those are the ones that we have to reach. And incidentally, in McGill, you have an excellent professor who I'm sure has raised the banner high, and that is Professor Troy. So you've got a great man at McGill doing that, although I think he has moved to Israel, but he may hold appointments in 2 places. So the fact of the matter is, we're dealing with something that we have not seen since the 1930s. And forgive me for repeating myself. You combat bad ideas with good ideas, and you demand of our elected representatives, whether it's in Canada or the United States, that they speak out unequivocally and boldly condemning anti-Semitism. That's what you got to do. Beyond that, I cannot say. Thank you.
Thank you. My question, you mentioned in your speech it's going to be very difficult for our grandchildren, our children who are going to schools in the Northeast. If you have a grandchild who is now, such as ours, who's applying to colleges and been accepted in the Northeast, but has also been accepted in the South, is there a decision, that a guidance that we should do? Should we say, go to the Northeast and let them know you're a Jew and be part of it, or are you better off to go to the South?
You know, these are, if I understand the question, it has to do with students who are looking to go to colleges. Should they go in the South? Should they go to the Northeast? Is that the basic question? Yeah. Look, when my nephew was accepted at Harvard, I told my brother, take a second mortgage, take a third mortgage. The Ivies are still the Ivies. They are an entree into they give you an entree into the highest echelons of American society. If my grandchild was accepted to Harvard, I would try to toughen the kid up, tell him what exists at Harvard, and send him to Harvard, send her to Harvard. Now, you have some very fine Southern schools now. I say now because, again, I'm not being condescending here. In the past, Southern schools really were not the equivalent of schools in the Northeast or in the Pac-10 in California and other places. But that's not true. The University of Florida in Gainesville is a very, very fine institution. The University of Miami has become a very, very good institution. Vanderbilt and Duke are as good as anything that exists in the Northeast. So, again, the Ivies are the Ivies. They have tremendous cachet. It is still that ticket that comes in. They are tarnished. They are tarnished. As my own institution, Union, which is a very, very fine institution, one of the oldest liberal arts colleges in the United States. They are tarnished by not the best administrations, but that will pass. If, God willing, we are all here 10 years from now, let me tell you, Harvard will still stand at the top of American education.
If you're in line there, Ian?
Sorry. My daughter, who's a university student in Canada, had asked that she finds that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are becoming intertwined. And she's had many conflicts with some pro-Palestinians. How do we deal with people that are combining anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism?
How do you, is there a connection between, if I understand the question, is there a connection between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism? That's really the question. I follow the lead of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who in the 1960s says anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. When you deny the right of the Jewish people to have a state of their own, that's anti-Semitism. And I must tell you, what happened on October 7th was a merger of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. The atrocities that were carried out, the physical mutilation, can only come from deep-seated ideologies. And the ideologies in this case were anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. I know there are people who disagree, but I think anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, following the lead of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., they are interchangeable.
Professor Berk, you talked about social media. Can you comment on the legacy media and their treatment of these issues?
I'm not sure what did you say legacy?
Yeah, you know, like the New York Times, you know, the Wall Street Journal, the old-fashioned newspapers that I read.
Oh. All right, I get you. Yes. No, now I understand. Now look. You see where we are here? Behind that wall is the Torah. The New York Times is not the Torah. Nor is the New York Times is not the Torah.
Right.
Nor is the Washington Post. Nor, in fact, the paper that I like. I read them all every day. Also, the Wall Street Journal is not the Torah. Now, what do I mean by that? When it comes to the New York Times, one should be aware that on two of the greatest stories of the 20th century, the New York Times was out to lunch. One set deals with the Soviet Union. The New York Times correspondent, Walter Duranty, their Soviet correspondent, covered up for Stalin during the collectivization which took millions of lives and in the purges. In fact, in the Times building, where they have pictures of all of their winners of Pulitzer Prizes, underneath his picture is an asterisk. The man was a whore for the Soviet Union. And the other issue is the Holocaust. Almost 20 years ago, Max Frankl, himself a German Jewish refugee, apologized to the readers of the New York Times for the abysmal coverage that the Times gave to the Holocaust. So I take the print media, I take all media with a grain of salt. So what do? You write your letters. What do? If you don't like the newspaper, don't subscribe to it. But again, you've got to make it, you've got, in any possible way, when a speaker from the Times comes, question that individual. Question why Barry Reese wrote a letter to the New York Times complaining about being bullying and condescending and things like that. Has the Times addressed that issue? So what can I say to you? Again, I wish I could tell you, take on the New York Times. When you take on the New York Times, it's very difficult to do that. But I warn you all, never suspend your rational faculties. If it doesn't smell right, it doesn't sound right, it's not right. So, what do the three newspapers have in common, which I strongly resist? Here's a sentence from one of these three newspapers. I don't want to name one because I'm not sure where it came, but I know it came from them. The militants carried out a terrorist attack, killing a number of people. Why are they called militants? The militants carried out a terrorist attack, but not one of those three papers will refer to Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. Our own State Department will, the European Union will, but these newspapers will not. Is it a left-wing bias in the newspapers? It probably is. If you want an answer from me, believe me, my students accuse me of a multitude of sins. Waffling is never one of them. I cannot tell you any more about that. Send your letters to the newspapers. Talk to people who come to you. They may speak to synagogues. I mean, there's no better champion of the state of Israel than Bret Stephens. Bret Stephens is the best. You can't get better than Bret Stephens. When he comes to speak, ask him. Thomas Friedman, when he comes to speak, ask him. Ask him about his Netanyahu fetish. I mean, he can't write an article without bashing Netanyahu. I don't understand it. It's as if he was a high schoolboy who was spurned on a date. Did Netanyahu refuse to give him an interview? I don't know. Now, make no mistake. Thomas Friedman is about the best and the brightest that you can get within the print media. He is a very, very smart and able man. But this is a time when they come to you. Ask them questions about that. There is the classic example is the picture in the New York Times. A week later, they did something about it. But remember, the adage that one picture is worth 1,000 words, which is haunting us now in Gaza. One picture is worth 1,000 words. There's a picture of an Israeli soldier, and at his knees is a man holding out his hand, begging for support. The initial caption was that this was a Palestinian that was beaten by the Israelis. No, it was an Israeli that was beaten by Palestinians and was asking the Israeli soldier to pick him up. So you've got to be very, very careful. More than that, I cannot do. Thank you for the question.
Next.
Thank you, Professor, for being here. And my question is, since we can't rely on the administrations of the universities to stand up for our grandchildren and our children, how can we educate our children before they get to university so they can best handle themselves with the confrontations we know that they're going to meet?
You know, these questions are all good. I wish my answers were as good as the questions that were being asked. First of all, the kids have to know, there's no substitute for reading. There really isn't. And Wikipedia is not the answer to it. You gotta grind it out the old-fashioned way. You gotta read the stuff. And then you gotta tell the kids what they are about to, what they should anticipate. They may anticipate faculty members who are very biased. They may anticipate students who are much tougher than any of the students that they've ever seen. Once they know the ground rules, once they know the turf, that's one of the best things that you can do for them. And remember, our cause is a just one. It really is. Israel is a democratic state. It is not an apartheid state. Israel has offered time and again the Palestinian people and leaders of the Arab world an independent Palestinian state. The students should know that. Again, forgive me, I'm a professor of history, so I got to deal with this. People should know that in 1937, the British, who had the mandate for Palestine and the Peel Partition Plan, offered the leaders of the Arab community a Palestinian state and a Jewish state. The leaders of the Palestinian community, before they were called Palestinian, remember in the 30s and 40s and 50s, the term Palestinian was usually applied to Jews who were living in Palestine. Kids ought to know that. The Arab side rejected it. They should know that on November 29th of 1947, the UN General Assembly issued Resolution 181, partitioning Palestine west of the River Jordan into a Jewish state and an Arab state. Once again, the Arabs rejected it. The Jews accepted it. Do you realize, had the Arab world accepted Resolution 181, partitioning Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state, this discussion would not take place. October 7th would never have taken place. There would not be a single Palestinian refugee, and we would be celebrating, we would have celebrated the 75th anniversary of an independent Palestinian state, as well as the state of Israel. The students should know that. Again, you know, my wife is going to yell at me afterwards. I went to a good high school in Brooklyn, Madison High School, which names for President of the United States, James Madison. We have 5 Nobel Prize winners from a neighborhood high school. You know what they have on the front of that building? A statement from James Madison. Education is the true foundation of civil liberty. You have to educate. You do the best you can. Some people will accept it. Some people will learn from the education. Some people reject it. But once again, in a free country, in a pluralistic country, in a country where it's a marketplace of ideas, this is the best that you can do.
So I'm going to ask a question if I can. You touched on this briefly in your earlier remarks this afternoon, and that is the relationship between the Jewish students and the African American students on campus, and why we're not getting support from them, given the history during the civil rights movement of all that Jewish people gave to the civil rights movement. Is that too far in the past for it to matter anymore, or are they driven by something else?
All right, the question is the relationship between the African American community and the Jewish community, and to put it in very blunt language, why don't African Americans understand that we were in their corner throughout the history of the civil rights movement? That's really what it comes down to. The answer is, it's too far in the past. It's very nice being a college professor. It really is. It's a good life. And I teach, my school is a beautiful school. It really is. It's one of the prettiest institutions of higher learning in the United States. But there's one thing wrong with being a professor, especially of history. Every year, I get 1 year older. And those damn kids, they're always between 17 and 22. Do you know what that means? It means that things that were important to me, and I suspect to you. The Second World War, the Holocaust, the creation of the State of Israel. For me, I'm not a Holocaust survivor, I'm not the children of Holocaust survivors, but I grew up with that stuff, as many of you grew up with that stuff. For these kids, it's nothing. Absolutely nothing. It means nothing. And I'm more sensitive to it because I always liked history. My father liked history. He would say to me, "Come on, I'll talk to you how it was during the Depression." May he rest in peace. I said, "Dad, I want to watch the Yankee game." So I understand where these kids are coming from. It is ancient history. And you try to educate, and again, do the students know, for example, that of the 3 people who were killed in Mississippi in the Mississippi summer of 1964, 2 were Jews? Do they know about a man by the name of Stanley Levison, who helped write Martin Luther King's speeches, took him on vacation, represented him everywhere? Do they know about Marvin Rich? Do they know about Harry Wachtel? Do they know about the Jewish money that flew into the civil rights movement? Do they know about, again, the 3 Irvings, Irving Howe or Irving Kristol? These are the men that in the highbrow press fought for the cause of civil rights. They don't know this. You can teach them, but again, it is ancient history for them. And to get right to the point, the word that is being left out in your discussion and my discussion up until now is the word intersectionality. What the pro-Palestinian people have been able to do on college campuses is to reach out to minority groups, Black organizations, African-American organizations, the LGBTQ organizations, American Indian organizations, and create the myth that they are oppressed, the Palestinians are oppressed, the Israelis are white, which of course is not altogether true. The Israelis are white, they're white privileged, they're colonialists. We are oppressed, the Palestinians are oppressed, we must fight against the state of Israel. Intersectionality, they have won that battle on that campus. On every campus, they have won that. In fact, at Harvard, I think there was a sign, excuse me, Queers for Palestine. Despite the fact that a gay or lesbian man or woman who stepped inside of an Arab country, they would be burned alive or buried alive. Do they know that? I don't think they do. So again, one's got to make this clear.
Thank you.
Aside, Schwerner was known to me with the movement, the black movement. Schwerner was one of the Jewish boys in Mississippi who was killed.
I'm sorry.
Well, you were referring to the blacks, knowing the blacks, the Jews who went down
yes.
to Mississippi.
Right.
One of them was Schwerner. He was known to me.
Oh, you knew him? Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Lived on 86th Street.
Right.
Okay, my question is this. I have a lot of problems with the word anti-Semitism. And I just really can't put my hands around it because anti-Semitism refers really to everyone in the Semitic world.
It doesn't.
Muslims and everyone.
It doesn't. It does not.
But the name does. It's really
Yes.
Jew hatred.
Yes, that's what. Go. You finish, and then I'll comment. You finish.
The true word is, it's really Jew hatred. And why don't we call it just that?
Right. He is making a point, and it's a good point. Anti-Semitism, in its most literal sense, is hostility to people who are of Semitic origin. But everybody knows, even from the very beginning, anti-Semitism is hostility towards Jews. The old word used to be Judeophobia, a hatred of Jews. Then there was anti-Judaism. But anti-Semitism means something very, very different from Judeophobia and certainly from anti-Judaism. Anti-Semitism, the term was coined at the end of the 19th century. Let me put it to you this way. For 2,000 years, Christians might say, you see that Jewish boy crossing the street? Let's beat the living daylights out of him because his ancestors killed Jesus. That's not anti-Semitism. That's anti-Judaism. Anti-Semitism is, you see that Jewish kid crossing the street? The evil of that Jewish kid is not in his Talmud, it's not in his Torah, it's in his genes, it's in his blood. Meaning that the anti-Semite believes that a Jew could kiss the cross 1,000 times, but a Jew is a Jew is a Jew because it's in his blood. And the logic of that is, as the Nazis demonstrated, if the Jew is evil because it's in his blood, no amount of assimilation, no amount of, let's say, embracing another religion, whether it's Christianity or Islam, it cannot change the fate. The Jew is inherently, genetically, biologically, molecularly, is an evil person. And the result has to be, he must be eliminated from the face of the earth. That's what anti-Semitism means, and I think that the overwhelming majority of people know that that is precisely what it means. Now, to be more precise, it means the Jews dominate American society. The Jews are only interested in the state of Israel or in other Jews. Jews have nothing but contempt for people who are not Jewish. Jews will cheat other people who are not Jewish. That's what makes the left wing of the Democratic Party so dangerous. Because Rashida Tlaib, she has introduced this in Ilan Alma. They have said these things publicly. They have taken stuff that was on the margin and put it into the mainstream. The most dangerous of them all is Reverend Farrakhan. Reverend Farrakhan is the most dangerous of them all. But let me say, and I'll end this part of the discussion, I am not speaking now, I think you may think that what I'm speaking is foolish, but it's not. There is an inherent beauty or an intellectual coherence in anti-Semitism. Forget the beauty. There's an intellectual coherence in anti-Semitism. The intellectual inherence, or let's say the intellectual coherence of anti-Semitism, is that anti-Semitism explains multi-causal phenomena in a monocausal way. I will say that again. Anti-Semitism explains multi-causal phenomena in a monocausal way. Why did we lose the war? Why did Germany lose the war in World War I? Well, the answer is they were beaten on the battlefield. There were too many British, French, Canadian, and ultimately American soldiers. By the early part of 1918, 300,000 American soldiers were arriving in France. The British could draw upon their colonial empire. After all, for those of you who have come from Canada, are you aware that 80,000 Canadian soldiers on a population base of less than 12 million fought? Every Canadian knows about Vimy Ridge. If you're Canadian, you don't know, you should know. The Canadians lost 10,000 men. 10,000 men at the Battle of Vimy Ridge. But what did the anti-Semites say? Our gallant soldiers would have won on the field of battle. There was light at the end of the tunnel. We lost World War I, not because we were defeated on the field of battle, we were defeated by the Jews who stabbed us in the back. That's what in German is called the Dolchstoß, the stab in the back. Or, to put it more in a more modern and American context, why is there AIDS in the African American community? Why are so many black children born with disabilities? Jewish doctors did it. Jewish doctors did it. That's what, again, multi-causal phenomena in a monocausal way. Look, 15 million black people were taken from Africa and brought to the New World. Most of them went to Latin America, some went to Cuba, and not that many actually went to the United States. Most go to Latin America. Who's responsible for the slave trade? The British, the Dutch, the Portuguese, and the Spaniards. But not in the eyes of the anti-Semites. The Jews are responsible for slavery. The Jews brought them over. The Jews were the most important among the slave traders and the slave owners. It is to use the old language, it's Narishkeit. It's stupidity and foolishness. But that's what anti-Semitism is. And that's why it is used again and again and again. I gave you in the talk on Ukraine, I gave you the Russian expression. Bezhidov spasai Rossiyu, beat the kikes and save Russia. Some of you may be more familiar with the German expression. At every Nazi party rally, you saw a banner with this expression. People thought it was Hitler that coined the expression. It wasn't. It was a German historian by the name of Heinrich von Treitschke who said, and this is what the Nazis would use, in German it is, Die Juden sind unser Unglück. The Jews are our misfortune. That is anti-Semitism. More than you ever wanted to know. Forgive me.
No. Go on. We're going to take 2 questions here, that's all. And then I promise, we have a guest here from London, and I promised him the last question.
So talking about anti-Semitism, and I'll make this short, obviously anti-Semitism has grown in America and the world. The world has been fooled. The anti-Semitism has grown throughout the world, and the world has been fooled October 7th. And there's a direct underlying theme throughout the world. And I feel, and we've tried as hard as we could, is there generational learned behavior that the parents, the grandparents, the second and third has provided the college student, whether it's Jewish, Palestinian, they just didn't come to these universities and become anti-Semitic.
If you're asking the question, does it come from parental and grandparents teaching? The answer to a certain extent
and if
is
this
yes.
is not, and the question is, how do we, because this is anti-Semitism will just grow, and we will have another World War II or Nazism or fascism come to the country. I would just like you to comment on that, if we're not
First of all,
guided.
I don't think we're going to see another Holocaust. I don't think we are going to see a massive assault against Jews in the United States. We're going to see something that is, again, contrast to the golden age that you and I lived through. Things are going to be a little bit more difficult. Now, where does it come from? Plato used to say, only the dead have seen the last of war. That's true. Only dead Jews have seen the last of anti-Semitism. Do not believe, short of the coming of the Messianic age, that anti-Semitism will disappear. It is always there. Some of it comes from what you have said, generation to generation to generation. It's always there. Some of it comes from the teachings of professors, teachers at all levels. Some of it comes from the media. Thank God, both in the United States and in Canada, that this is, by and large, an insubstantial number of people. They will always be there. They will look for excuses to come out of the woodwork. The Arab-Israeli conflict gives them that excuse. So we will always have to deal with it. But either you believe that both countries, Canada and the United States, are strong enough and basically decent enough to repudiate these vicious forms of hatred, or you should get out of the country. It is simple as that. Again, if you believe that the apocalypse is going to come here or to Canada, then get out. You're foolish to stay if you believe that, then the time is to get out. But I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I'm not a Canadian citizen. I don't know that much about Canada. I have many Canadian friends. I cherish them. I believe in Canada. I believe in the intrinsic decency of the Canadian people, as I believe in the intrinsic decency of the American people. But make no mistake, I don't want to end on this somber note. Make no mistake, it will never disappear. It will never, never disappear. That is our fate, that is our destiny. But we must ally ourselves with the decent elements within our societies to combat this. You know, the rabbi will have the last word. It's his turf, and he should have the last word. I must tell you, between your rabbi and your chazanit, you got the best thing going in America, let me tell you. You really do. It is absolutely remarkable. So he will have the last word. I will use the last phrase in talking to Jews and to talking to other people who are confronting discrimination. The Torah gives us the example. Again, what do we say? What did you say 2 weeks ago when we ended the book? With the end of Genesis, Bereshit. Chazak, chazak, v'nitazek. Be strong, don't be afraid, and let us strengthen ourselves. Thank you.
We got to take these two more. I cut her off last time, and then we want to come on up? No.
Professor Berk, I met you a few weeks ago in a concert, and I told you what's going to happen if the Jewish people who give so much money to the universities and colleges are going to withdraw the money and stop giving money. And you say it's too complicated. You can answer the question?
It won't, you say, what did I say? What did I say?
What?
You say it again.
To say this again? I ask you, what's going to happen if the Jewish, the rich people, who are giving money to the universities, the big universities,
Right.
the name, because they want to...
It will have
put
an
the
impact.
name.
It will have an impact. But it's no panacea. It will have an impact. There's no question about that.
Okay.
That's
what I asked
Yeah.
you when you say it's
Here's the last question.
complicated and you answer me.
No. Thanks, but here we go. Last question.
Professor Berk, excuse me, everybody, if I change the subject, but I know that one of your specialities is Eastern Europe, and I was born in Budapest in 1944. Okay, so Eastern Europe is my is what obsesses me. I would like to ask you a question which I already asked another great historian, Martin Gilbert.
Right.
And perhaps you could put the question into context for the audience. My question is, what do you think about Regent Horthy?
You know, he's asking me, this is a good historical question. He's asking me about Admiral Horthy. Admiral Horthy was the regent of Hungary, really in the interwar period and in the period of the Second World War. Now, you may ask me, how does Hungary have an admiral? How does Hungary have an admiral? It doesn't have an outlet to the sea. But if you knew your history, I'm not doing to spin it out. Hungary was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the only efficient aspect of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was the Austro-Hungarian Navy, which was based in Trieste. Trieste at that time was part of the Habsburg Empire. And you all know about this. You think, I'm like, what is he talking about? You know how you know about it? How many of you saw, either with your children or your grandchildren, The Sound of Music?
10 times.
Who's the captain? Captain von Trapp was a submarine commander. He was the greatest naval war hero of the Habsburg Empire. So the Navy had considerable prestige. Admiral Horthy was the ruler. Now, to get right, first of all, you are one of the luckiest men alive to have been born in Budapest in 1944 and to be alive. That is absolutely remarkable. It is in 1944. Again, more history than you ever wanted to know, but that's what I do. Hungary was a German ally. But Admiral Horthy, who nobody ever said was the sharpest tool in the shed, nonetheless, Admiral Horthy put his finger up to the wind and knew that the Germans finally, after Stalingrad, were not going to win the Second World War. Horthy began to send emissaries to deal with the British and the Americans. Abwehr, German intelligence, picked that up. Hungary was too close to Germany. Hitler could not tolerate a defection by Hungary. So on March 19th of 1944, the Germans carried out Operation Margareta, in which the Germans occupied Hungary. Hungary was transformed from an allied country into a conquered country. Not long after that, the man that was reputedly known as the Angel of Death, Adolf Eichmann, came with an entourage to Hungary and talked to Admiral Horthy. I want the Jews of Hungary. Given annexations, the total number of Jews in Hungary was 750,000 to 800,000. Now, what comes next is a matter of debate. Horthy seems to have agreed with Eichmann. I will give you the Jews of Hungary, but not all of them. I will give you the Jews living outside of Budapest. That's who I will give you. And beginning at the end of April, Jews in all the areas outside of Budapest, but not in Budapest, outside of Budapest, the Jews were put first in ghettos. Ghettos didn't last long, and then sent to Auschwitz. This is the Holocaust at high tide. Between the end of April and July 6th of 1944, 436,000 Jews were sent, more than that, a shade more than that, were sent primarily to Auschwitz. This is the Auschwitz at high tide. This is the time when sometimes between 5,000 and 10,000 Jews were gassed and cremated. There's nothing like this in the history of the Holocaust. What happens to Hungarian Jewry, this is the Holocaust at high tide. So the question my friend is asking is, Admiral Horthy was the leader of Hungary. He could have stopped it. The Germans were so struck thin. Remember, we are talking late spring of 1944. The Red Army is coming from the east. We are about to land on Normandy on June 6th. Every German soldier and every German politician, including Hitler, they all know we're coming. They don't know where we're coming. They don't know precisely when we're coming, but they know we're coming into France. The Germans are struck thin. You know probably better than I that the extermination of Hungarian Jewry, the deportation of Hungarian Jews, could not have been done unless the Hungarian police and the Hungarian army collaborated with the Germans. He could have stopped it. And on July 6th of 1944, he does stop it. He says, enough. Now, why does he do it? Why does he stop it? Well, the RAF bombed Budapest in 1944, late spring 44. In addition to that, 4 men, these are the only 4 Jews that ever escaped from Auschwitz. They met a priest, not the nuncio, but a Catholic priest, an emissary from the Vatican, who was in Bratislava, in Slovakia. The first 2, one of whom went to Canada and became a professor of pharmacology at the University of British Columbia, they drew pictures of the crematory and the gas chambers. That's the first the world knew about that. That becomes known as the Auschwitz Protocols. Then another 2 men, my friends from Beth Tzedek in Toronto, he showed up. When I gave a lecture on Auschwitz, that man showed up. He was the second 2. Czeslaw Mordovich. He had also escaped, but he escaped in May. And he was the one that brought information about the extermination of the Hungarian Jews. That went to Roosevelt, that went to the Pope, that went to Sweden, and all sorts of things began to take place. That's why Horthy stopped it on July 6th. But the question is, if he stopped it on July 6th, could he have stopped it earlier? And the answer is he could have. So I'm no supporter of Admiral Horthy. Later on, the Germans didn't think Horthy was collaborating enough. So they engineered his overthrow, and an organization, to correct my Hungarian, the Nyilas, what is known as the Arrow Cross, an anti-Semitic, a fascist organization, was placed in power in Budapest, and then the apocalypse began to descend upon the Jews of Budapest. It's only as a consequence of men like Wallenberg, that's where Wallenberg does his work, in Budapest, Karl Lutz, Swiss diplomat, and a future pope. Pope John the 23rd was operating in the Balkans as well. So there were people that worked in behalf of the Jews and saved the Jews and saved large numbers of Jews. But, again, the direct answer to your question is, I am no supporter of Admiral Horthy. Now, the present government, led by Prime President Orban, is a supporter of Horthy. And on the banks of the Danube, there are 2 very important memorials. One is on the Danube, one is located inland. One is, if you ever get to Budapest, either with me or somebody else, They take you to be taken to the Danube, and you see the porcelain shoes. Those shoes represent the Jews that were thrown into the Danube. They were chained together or tied together. A number of them were shot. They fell into the Danube. Tens of thousands of people were killed in that way. There is also a government, by the government, by Orban's government, a memorial to Admiral Horthy. He's considered a great Hungarian patriot. But then, right at the bottom of the memorial, there's an unofficial memorial. When the relatives of Jews who were killed and deported bring the suitcases that some of their relatives had, and pictures of the murdered relatives who were sent to Auschwitz under Horthy's watch. That's the unofficial memorial. So what I'm saying to you is, in answer to, I gave you a long-winded answer, more history than you ever wanted to know. The succinct point is, Horthy was not a good man. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very, very much. We appreciate your knowledge, your insight, and also your time. And I'd like
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you for the privilege
I'd like to
of coming
invite you
here
back.
and sharing the Bima with you. Thank you.
So one little word to all of you or to all of us, and that is, if these are the issues that we're concerned about, and we should be concerned, if these are the issues that hurt us, that bring anxiety and fear to us, they should be. But there's something we can do besides sit and think and talk about it, and that is we have to support Jewish life as powerfully as we're capable. We have to be supporters of Jewish education, whether it's the Hebrew School, the early childhood program here, whether it's Jewish studies on the campus of FAU, or Jewish studies at Harvard University. We have to make sure that Jews are learned, that they understand their past, and that they're proud of it, and they can stand with power because of their knowledge. That's our obligation moving forward. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom. And thank you for coming. All right. Yeah. Whoops.
So I hope to see you again, and I really appreciate your presence.
Yeah. And good luck to you.
Thanks.